All right, it's February 15th, 2022, 7:30 PM. Going to call the regular meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission to order. Members present: Doug Roberts, Joe Hall, John Tehan, and Rebecca Sinoski. Item C, applications to be received, PZ-22-4, proposed zoning regulations, section 12.5. New Strategic Development Zone, SDZ, applicant, Planning and Zoning Commission.
This is just to be received. We've got the public hearing, which will be scheduled for the first meeting in March.
Okay, sounds good. All right, that brings us to item D, the continuation of the public hearing. APZ-21-24, special permit for signage at Love's Travel Stop, 3 Polster Road, applicant Betty Torrenson, owner Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores Incorporated. Continued from the first. Greg.
All right, good evening. Well, here we are again. We have made some progress on the illumination data for the signage. I know that Chris got the one from ESCO, which showed 21-foot candles at the face for red graphics, 82 for yellow, and 115 for white. So that was the first thing that made it into the actual packet. Too close to the hearing, we got information from CAT scale that the foot candle reading at the sign at a distance of 1 foot would be 65. So again, within the range of what ESCO said would comply with the dark sky requirements. So that much. We have been having difficulty getting the data for the pricing signage for diesel and for regular at the sign. We are still trying, but the manufacturer has not been responsive yet. If we just can't get it from them, I'd suggest a condition of approval, but we're still trying. More significantly, and I've been checking my email inbox as I've been sitting here in the hope that would come, Fuss and O'Neill, which was the engineering firm that did the work on the special permit and the site plan, did overlay the site plan with the sign locations with the landscaping plan, and unfortunately noticed a few conflicts, which they're still working out just to make sure the plants don't interfere with the sight lines or anything else in terms of installation. So I was hoping before we started, I'd have a revised site plan to at least put up on the screen so everybody could see it. As of right now, it still hasn't come yet. So I'm going to suggest that we continue this again until March 1st. And I think by then we'll have it. And if the data does come on the pricing signage, we'll have that as well. But I believe those are the open items at this point. Unless, Mike, if I'm missing anything or if anybody else was expecting something else.
I don't think you're missing anything on my end that I can think of at the moment. Any other questions from the commission that are outstanding?
I think that covered it. I know the landscaping was one of them, the foot candle readings from the how much these signs illuminate and so forth. I think we kind of need that in order to move forward.
Yeah, we have everything except for, like I say, I don't know if they're LEDs or what, but the part of the sign that shows the pricing for fuel.
Mm-hmm.
We have everything else, but not that. And we're still waiting on that. So I'll see if Betty can redouble her efforts with the manufacturer to get that. I know Love's has done this kind of signage in other dark sky compliant jurisdictions. So I think this is feasible. It's just a question of, I think, some additional communication with the manufacturer.
All right, Mike, what do you think? We just continue it until the first?
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you guys. I think that we have 3 outstanding issues, and I mean, they could be conditioned if you wanted to, but we can also keep it open.
I'd rather see some of the stuff. We might condition like one thing or so forth. You know, if, say, for instance, the diesel sign, the price signs or something aren't there, but I don't know if we want to do 3 things. Well, how's the rest of the commission feel?
I think that's a reasonable approach, Walter. I agree.
All right.
Yeah, I agree, Walter.
Anyone want to make a motion to?
So I move we continue to March 1st.
I'll second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so public hearings continued until March 1st, so we get at least the bulk of the information.
Yeah, I appreciate it and
Right.
apologize for the delay. There was just
Right.
some cross communication, but I expect I'll have it.
Now, these things happen. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. And thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
All right.
All right, nothing under new business. Item F, unfinished business, affordable housing plan, front end narrative.
Okay, so as part of the email that I sent out last week with the agenda, hopefully you all received the draft for the sort of the first go around of the affordable housing plan. And Rachel's here to kind of go through what's there. I mean, we're not going to go through line by line, but we can kind of work through what we have to this point. If anybody has any specific questions or wants to have, discuss more deeply any of the stuff that you saw there, if folks had a chance to read it or didn't, anything.
I read through it. For the most part, it's what we talked about. Just interesting reading the demographics and so forth, seeing what the future is projected. And
Rachel, do you want to just kind of run through and hit the
Right.
highlights for everybody?
we're currently at 7.5%. That's correct.
Yeah.
Affordable housing.
I can run through
Yeah.
it if people would like that.
I'm sure,
So-
I'm sure most people want to hear it.
So just a question before. I had a question the other week on this too. So there's no advantage or disadvantage to Willington because we don't have public sewage or public water. There's like more than half the towns in Tallinn County do have those services. So
Yeah.
are we held to the same standard? Not having
Um,
those?
Do you mean in terms of the percentage of affordable housing?
Well, if
That's
a
being
builder
counted?
if a builder is providing the affordable housing, we get this dollar amount, $2,100 a month. So if I'm a builder, it's conceivably easier to build something if I can tap into a public water and sewage supply than
Right,
if I can't, like in Willington.
yeah. Yeah, that is like definitely a disadvantage of not having widespread sewer and water. But like it is, yeah. There's
So the
still
state
same
doesn't make any
standard.
concessions based on not having that infrastructure in place.
I don't believe so, no.
No, one of the things that's interesting is that obviously a lot of this has come to be or has really come to the forefront in Connecticut related to the Desegregate CT Coalition and a lot of the proposals that they've put forward. One of the things that they are basically pushing for this session, which just started, I don't know that it has a lot of traction. Certainly in the planning community, it does not, would basically mandate that towns provide in areas with water and sewer a residential density of 8 units an acre, I think it is. So rather than say we recognize that towns that don't have the infrastructure are at a disadvantage because construction costs are high, they're sort of going at it the other way and saying, well, if you have this infrastructure, we want you to give us a density of 8 units an acre. There's a fundamental disconnect because, one of the things that we talk a lot about with how you get here is towns can adopt inclusionary zoning standards.
Mhm.
And one of the things towns can do is say you can pay a fee in lieu of actually establishing the affordable housing units.
Mhm.
And the idea is the town puts it into a housing trust fund and then uses that money to create that unit elsewhere. But the construction costs are so high that the fees that they would end up having to pay are astronomical. And the town either has to, make the developer build the units in the subdivision or development that he's constructing, or take a fee in lieu of that's significantly less than what it would cost to build those units. So if you're getting a fee for 10 units, maybe you can build 4.
Mhm.
because the costs for construction are just so high. So yeah, you're definitely zeroing in on something that is not well addressed in the statute.
So
The
is
only
there a
way you're
bet?
gonna get 8 units on an acre, it's gotta be like in a, some sort of a, either apartment house, you know, multi-story of some sort. You're not gonna put eight single-family houses on an acre.
Right, yep. So it would just have to be 8 dwelling units, but you know, in this case, Willington doesn't have that infrastructure, so we wouldn't be subject to that. Not that I think it'll pass, but it wouldn't apply here.
We don't even have good public transportation, anything like, you know, that, of that nature that would typically go along with that.
Right.
Is there any benefit of including that in like the preface of the document that, you know, basically, you know, up front in the document, it states that, hey, we understand that we're operating at a disadvantage here because we do not have this infrastructure in place. Just so if anyone else reads it in the future, it's black and white and clear.
Yeah, we can definitely like underscore that. Either in like the introduction or when we're talking about like infrastructure. But I think it'd be better to have it up front, probably in, like,
Yeah.
the
Yep.
introduction. Yeah, you're right.
Yep.
Maybe both places. Put it up front and then expound on it a little bit when talking about
Sure.
infrastructure and put it in both
Yeah.
spots.
Mike, what's the penalty for not hitting the 10%?
So there's 2 different things in play. The 10% affordable housing, if you do not have that, what it means is that a developer can come in and propose an affordable housing project and will not be subject to zoning. So they can build as many units as they can get based on septic. They can build it as tall as they want. They can build as few parking spaces as they want. They can build as close to the property lines as they want. It basically makes them exempt from anything that doesn't directly correlate to health and safety. And, you know, even things like sidewalks, towns have said, you got to run a sidewalk because folks necessarily won't have vehicles. And they said, we can't do it. And they denied the project and the court said, you got to allow it. So even something like a sidewalk wouldn't qualify. So that is not necessarily a penalty. It just means you're subject to that. And then under 8-30J, which is the statute that says we have to develop this plan, there really is no penalty. They haven't really sort of outlined the stick. So it says the towns have to have one, and we suspect that there will be certain funding criteria which will say you should include it, and if you don't, you might not be eligible. But unless I'm behind on something, Rachel can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no established penalty if we don't have that. So Rachel, I have it up on my screen. I don't know if you think it's better to share a screen and buzz through it, or what do you want?
Yeah, I can share my screen. Put this in a different window. Okay. So we start out with a short introduction, just talking about what we're actually defining affordable housing as when we're using it in like a capital A way. We talk about 8-30G, 8-30J, and explain that pretty briefly but clearly so people know like what everything is about before we get into it. I included a short like kind of methodology that just like kind of explains like how we like develop the plan, because sometimes people are curious and are like, I don't know, suspicious, I guess I'll say. So it's good to have that. And then we go over Willington's current housing situation. Pretty much just all the information that we talked about in like one of the first presentations I gave to you guys on what the housing stock looks like, what development has been like, what the housing, how units and structure look like, ownership. And then we get into affordable housing and the breakdown of what Willington has there. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, my dogs are barking. Hold on. And then we go into like the HUD FMR areas and what 80% of AMI and then 30% of AMI actually means. And then
So
we
those-
look at what,
That's just the criteria that we were talking about previously. We have to use the figures that are established by HUD to basically start the equation and come to this $2,000 mark. So, you know, they've got different areas of the state. So affordable housing is not the same, you know, in Stamford as it is here, obviously, but these are the data sources that sort of start that math equation off.
yeah. And then we looked at cost burden. So who's paying 30% or more of their income on housing costs in Willington. And you can see how it compares to Tolland and Connecticut too. And then it goes into current and projected population. This can also be in an appendix. Some towns prefer it to be in an appendix because sometimes, I don't know, it's a bit much to include.
Rachel, can you go back up to the cost burden?
Yeah.
So basically, and I know that we're going through the sections and there'll be plenty of time to discuss this, but I think it's kind of important to lay out. Cost burdenness is something they look at because the idea is if you're spending more than, it's 30% or 40%.
30%.
What was it?
30%.
So if you're spending more than 30%, you're considered of your monthly income on housing costs, you're considered to be cost burdened. And the reason why this is an important factor is because when people start spending more than that, they tend to stop spending on groceries, going out to dinner, childcare, doctor's appointments, some of that disposable income. And so if you have a really high housing costs and folks, but you don't have very high household incomes, they don't have the money to spend at your local coffee shop and your diner and in all those other places, and that money doesn't make it back into the community. So they really, that 30% threshold. And so if you look, Willington is, well, that number, I guess they didn't pull it out of the graphic, but we'll cite it in the actual section. The cost burdenness for renters is about 25%, but it looks like it's fairly low for owners, if I'm reading this correctly. It's a little small.
Looks like about 10%. Yeah.
So, you know, and Rachel's seen more of this across Connecticut to be able to give any thoughts as to how that fares, but, you know, obviously you want that number to be as low as possible.
Yeah, I mean, from the towns that I've been working with so far, that is like probably the highest renter cost burden or one of the highest. So it is definitely something to keep in mind. What are the barriers to renters in Willington? Yeah, and just, you know, that is broken down between moderate and severe burden. So it's 55% of renters are cost burdened. Okay. So then it goes
Would that also be because of the college town aspect, the fact that
that's definitely a factor. A lot of younger renters are included in that.
Okay.
Definitely.
Those aren't necessarily low-income renters. If they're college students, the parents could be helping subsidize the rents and so forth.
Mhm.
Or they have 17 kids packed into a 2-bedroom like we did, you know?
Well, that goes on. We all know that happens.
Yeah, I can also get more information on that number as it pertains to low income families, like in households of different sizes. That might give us more information on if it's a lot of students or if it is like low income families.
Yeah, because a student's not a fair comparison in terms of like what we're trying to achieve with
No, totally.
low income.
Yeah,
Yep. I'll make a note. Okay. Yeah, so then it just goes into what kind of Willington's background is, some more context on who's living here, different, how big each age cohort is, and obviously, you know, we can see there's a lot of young people, so a lot of college kids in town, which we know.
Yeah, so we'll have to make sure that we make it very clear. I mean, she's doing that right in this section below, that a lot of our demographics are very skewed because of UConn. And, you know, normally the demographics and age distributions, that at least the ones that I've seen, you know, the scale is different because you usually see that big bar closer in the, you know, 50 to 60 age range, right? They have this big cohort of the population which is aging, and towns are staring down the barrel of a massive population decrease, you know, in the next 20 years. But our data, you know, it's hard. We can't separate out UConn students, particularly if they come in and they have a parent who rents them a condo or something, right? So it's, you know, we'll have to make it very clear in this, and we'll be sure to, that we recognize that that has skewed the data to some extent.
Yep. Different household types, what the family types tend to be like in Willington. And then we look at some projections. So looking at, you know, potential population decrease.
So that one is basically showing a decrease of about 63 to 59, is it? Is that what I'm seeing there?
yeah, 64 to 59. Yeah.
Mhm.
So about 500 people. What's the, I don't know, I can't do that math in my head to figure out what the percentage is. And what's,
I can't either. I might say it here. Well, maybe I don't say it
It's
specifically.
roughly a 12th,
yeah,
8%.
I think I was just talking about this in Bolton, and they're looking at like a 25% decrease in the same amount of time. There's and Tolland as well, looking at significant population decrease, which seemed to be a much greater decrease than what Willington is seeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ledyard has like a 25% decrease too. I'm surprised. And then we break that down between the age cohorts too, to see what percentage of the population they make up and how that's changing or projected to change. And then we do include like kind of a paragraph about how like the projections are not like scientific fact and not like, you know, it's not sealed, so people don't get scared. And then we talk about infrastructure and other trends. This is where I'll expand more on the lack of sewer and water and how that is a disadvantage. And, you know, things aren't going to be Cabrini greening it up in Willington anytime soon. And then I go into community survey results. Yeah, I think we got like 100 responses. And so this is kind of just the narrative of what people ended up saying. And there's some screenshots too. Probably include more in the final. And then we go into discussion of the review of the plan of conservation and development that we went over a meeting or two ago. Basically the same table that we went over, we're putting in here. And then it goes into the zoning regulation analysis. So basically everything that we talked about. And then that's where we're up to. So we're nearing the end. We're just up to basically what our plan and goals are now.
As you flashed through there, I saw that word consider in there a couple of times. I thought we were talking about trying to make something a little stronger than consider.
In the plan of
Yeah.
conservation and development.
Yeah. There's consider allowing it, what just went past it. It's like 2 or 3 down. There you go.
Yeah, so this is pulled directly from the plan of conservation development. This is language that basically we're saying, like, we're pointing out that the language is pretty weak in like the right-hand column. But then so when we're talking like our goals and implementation, we're gonna use like strong language
Okay.
and harken back to that and be like, okay, like the POCD did not use strong language, and we're trying to do that now.
That should
Okay.
work anyway in harmony with what we were doing with the village district and everything, because that's that same area.
Yep.
So, and yeah, so this, the last step where you're seeing there, section 7 is where we will create an implementation table or set of goals. So we'll use the sort of the weaker language that's in this table up here and create something that's a bit more of a roadmap with some of that stronger language. And this is, as she fleshes this out and we continue to build these sections, and if you guys have any additional comments, you can certainly pass them along. Once we're done with all the text and we're good with the language and we're comfortable with the graphs and where we want them, et cetera, then we'll format it professionally and it'll all be done to look like the POCD basically. But while we're working on this, we want to be able to collaborate and make changes. So, we still have the survey open. We did that blast out through the Board of Education. So, we'll leave that open as long as we can. And we'll continue to work on this. If you have comments, we'll keep including them. And then as we get towards the end of the document, when we get basically a final complete plan, we'll schedule a public hearing so that we can, get comments and feedback from the public. Statute doesn't require it, but it's a good idea anyway.
Sure.
Now, in these sections 6 and 7 here, is that the commission going to work on that in conjunction with staff to kind of come up with what steps can we take to improve it and how does Willington move forward?
Yeah.
Because we got to decide where we want it to be. Is it going to be senior housing? Is it going to be, apartment dwellings? We got to kind of come up with that mix.
Mm-hmm. So what I can actually send to you all, we have like a list of basically like all the strategies that we've recommended to other towns. So it's kind of like a menu of options that I can send around, and maybe we can talk about it next time, or I don't know. But that gives a pretty good idea of what other towns are doing.
But it's certainly not a one size fits all. We got to look at
it's a really long document too, but there's a lot in it, and it's broken down between like regulatory changes, policy changes, things like that.
Okay, be interested to see that.
Yeah, it might just be a good like first step before we actually decide what's happening.
Yeah, there's a lot of non-conventional options for how you might make this happen, right? Because really, affordable housing is something that's deed restricted. So it could be that the town, establishes an inclusionary housing regulation. And so we end up with this trust fund, and you take that money and you buy down existing affordable housing units instead of creating them. It could be, that you work to obtain grants associated with that to add on to, Button Hill. There's so many different options that are sort of non-conventional.
So who would that make the owner, the town?
No, if the town establishes this trust fund, you can administer those funds in a ton of ways. So you could take that money and you can buy the deed restriction. So the property owner still owns it, but you're paying them for the deed restriction because they're going to basically lose money every month having to rent that unit for less. So the menu that Rachel's referencing basically outlines all the different things that you can choose from, and then we can cherry pick what we think is contextually, what makes sense for Willington.
So the way that works is the owner basically gets paid a subsidy to make it worth his while to keep that deed.
Well, yeah. So if we assume for math numbers, you're going to be able to rent it for a dollar, $1 less per year, and you need to, and that's, and the deed restrictions over 40 years, the town's going to say, okay, well, you're going to lose $40 over this deed restriction. So we're going to hand you a check for $40 so that you are even, but we're going to use the money collected from fees, through development or housing trust fund, which could be grants, it could be donations, it could be fee in lieu of affordable housing units elsewhere. So it doesn't come out of the taxes, it doesn't come out of the town's budget.
All right. Sounds good to me. I want to see them.
That sounds good. I will find that and I'll send it to Mike to send to you guys.
All right.
All right. Well, yeah. And so maybe what we can do is I can pull that big stuff out and we can just kind of go through each one, and I can talk to them about each one, what it is, and we can kind of get a sense of what seems like it makes more sense and what doesn't, and kind of shortlist some stuff that we can then explore through the AHP. All right. Anybody have anything else for any questions for me or for Rachel? Crickets.
Oh, good. All right. G, approval of minutes, February 1st, 2022.
I move to approve the minutes, February 1st, 2020.
All in
Second.
favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, minutes approved. No correspondence. Aye, public comment. The commission will hear brief comments at this time from anyone wishing to speak. No business can be conducted here, nor can any comments be made about any items on the agenda. Anyone from the public? Nope.
I see
Okay,
Ralph has his hand up.
Whoa,
There he is.
come on, Walt.
you were slow on the draw there.
I have my hand up, dude.
All right, I didn't see it.
It's your green
You
screen.
weren't looking.
Yep.
All right. And I don't know if this is the right time to bring it up.
Is it on the agenda, Ralph?
I'm just going to talk about minutes for a moment, okay? And it's not on the agenda right now. My comments at the previous meeting weren't quite captured in the minutes. And since there was no public hearing tonight, I didn't get an opportunity really to bring it up there. Would it be best if I just bring it up at the continuation at the next meeting?
Yes.
Okay. I will do it then. That's all.
Thank you, Ralph. All right, staff report and discussion. 2018 POCD implementation update.
So We are, I think I mentioned this at the last meeting. Chris has been working on going through the existing POCD to get a sense of where we are. We have a couple of folks on the commission that weren't on the commission when the POCD was adopted. So we thought that it would be a good starting point, especially because of everything else going on with development and housing and this and that. So he's got a quick deck to show you, and I'll toss it over to him.
Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Alrighty.
Excuse me.
All right, let me share my screen. Can everybody see this PowerPoint here?
Yes.
Okay, so like Mike said, I've been going through the POCD, kind of trying to gauge where we're at based on the goals that were laid out when this was written. And so the POCD is, as you know, the guiding document to kind of where we're going as a town. And this POCD was written in 2017 and adopted in 2018. So about 5 years old, about halfway through its lifespan. The state requires each town to develop and adopt a POCD every 10 years. So we kind of wanted to go through this and look at the goals that were outlined and see kind of what we've done already and pick out goals that we want to put on the to-do list for the near future. And just want to make a note that not necessarily everything that's in there might still apply. As I said, this was written in 2017, so it's okay if we don't necessarily hit every goal that was written in there. So kind of how it's laid out in the plan, it's broken down the goals into 4 kind of main sections, that being conservation related, development related, infrastructure related, and implementation strategies. And then in each of those sections, it's broken down into subsections and different goals based on those sections. So you'll see a goal in blue. And then under those goals, there will be strategies laid out, then broken further down into policies and then specific action steps that can be taken to achieve those policies. And those action steps are assigned to commissions. So kind of going to focus on what's the Planning and Zoning Commission was assigned to in this plan. And we're going to go through this and then over the next couple meetings, and we'll break it down over the next few meetings and go through each of these sections. So tonight we're going to start with conservation, and the first one on there was protect natural resources. And the goal being to protect natural resources in order to maintain overall environmental health and contribute to the diversity, rural character, economy, and general welfare of Willington. And so the first little section here, one of these, the first, main overview or high level goal is to maintain and enforce regulations intended to protect surface and groundwater quality. And a couple of these strategies in order to achieve that policy. First one being review and coordinate zoning regulations for aquifers and other groundwater areas, state required APA regulations, section 5.09, section 17 of the zoning regulations. And then add water resource overlay zones to the zoning map, state APRA regulations. So I think this one, we're kind of hitting on. I think we have the aquifer protection areas mapped out in our GIS. And then I know me and Mike were talking today about in the GIS update that we'll be doing in the future, that we'll be putting the FEMA floodplain mapping into the new GIS once that gets on track. Going forward, consider impacts on water quality and public health as part of land use decisions, which is done currently. Eastern Highland Health District reviews that kind of stuff through the permitting process. Promote public education and outreach related to best management practices for wells, septic systems, underground storage tanks, fertilizer and pesticides. encourage the use of best management practices for the application and removal of road sand and salt, cleaning of catch basins, proper maintenance of on-site sewage disposal systems. And feel free to stop me if you guys want to highlight something or have any questions. So the next section is LID water quality. Willington will continue to promote low impact development strategies where appropriate to help protect water quality. Incorporate specific LID standards from the Connecticut Water Quality Manual in sections 4.2 of the zoning regulations. Consider modifying section 5.03 of the subdivision regulations to refer to LID standards in the zoning regulations. Update engineering standards to incorporate best management practices for LID. Mike, I'm not sure what we talked about where we're at with
LID.
these. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, and in the special development or the strategic development zone that we're going to be having the hearing on next month, we have some standards related to LID in there. It's tricky because low impact development is different things depending on the specific property, and just saying everything needs to have LID and setting specific infiltration rates and, you know, how you got to clean water in this format. And it is extremely expensive to design those types of sites. And again, based on soils and everything else, you don't necessarily have the ability to achieve everything on a one size fits all approach. So we're certainly trying to move in the direction of having development projects, rather than just collect the water, do something to treat it or clean it in some way before it gets released back into the ground, but trying to do that in a way that is sensitive to, again, not all sites are created equal.
Okay. Thanks. The next section was to protect water related resources. So a lot of this too has to do with the Inland Wetlands Commission. And if there's something that you guys see you think is pertinent and that you want to relay to another commission that's not necessarily assigned to the Planning and Zoning Commission, that's definitely something you can bring up, and we can talk about that. So the first one being preserve and protect water courses and wetlands and their functions. One of the strategies to do that would be to conduct an evaluation of wetland systems by watershed to quantify their functional value and prioritize protection efforts. Another high-level goal would be to maintain regulations and enforcement procedures regarding vegetation buffers between water courses, wetlands, and development or land disturbance.
I just have a quick question, Chris.
Yeah, sure.
A lot of these are saying Willington will, we will do this, we will do that. This is a 5-year-old plan. Have any of these steps been accomplished? Have we incorporated the LID standards into section 420 of the zoning regulations? Have we done those things yet or no?
I am honestly not sure.
Yeah, I think that the unstated takeaway from a lot of this is that, we're not, to my knowledge, at least since I have been in Willington, I'm not aware of some of the stuff that we've basically talked about having been done prior to me. The plan would have just been implemented. So we haven't done that yet. I think Chris and I, in discussing this and looking at it, plans of conservation and development are, in some cases, a blue sky sort of plan, and it's the POCD is developed separate from everything else that's going on. And a lot of times what happens is there's a bit of a divergence between what reality and market says should be done and what the POCD is sort of pushing for. So I think that there will be a little bit of a negotiation in us going through some of this stuff and saying, this is not necessarily appropriate, or we can do this in a different way. The market has changed for this, or, we have a different perspective on that. We're trying to work through this so we can get a sense of what remains the priority, if that makes sense.
Okay,
In other words, you don't want to make it so cost prohibitive to build a development here, something nobody wants to do it.
Right.
Right, because the stuff that Chris has outlined, if we implemented all of that, I mean, in some cases, you're adding, $30,000 to a project's design review. And, I'm not saying you haven't accomplished anything, but it becomes very cost prohibitive. And particularly in a town that is not teeming with commercial development like a Manchester or South Windsor, you have to look at this diminishing return, right? Can we achieve this through a standard site design? Can we do this through a condition of approval? Can we get at this in another way that doesn't demand the same costs, but still achieves the same goal?
I think you just hit the nail on the head, Mike.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So I think or was that B, the next section is floodplains. So one of the goals would be continue to regulate activity in flood prone areas in accordance with FEMA requirements. Next would be water quantity, promoting, again, low impact development strategies where and when appropriate to manage water runoff and water quantity, prevent major increases in runoff quantity, and prevent major decreases in storm infiltration. So another goal would be to modify regulations to encourage the use of pervious surfaces and other appropriate LID techniques, which, like Mike said, I think that's being looked at in the SDZ zone regulations. So the next section is 4.3, protect the overall environment. 1, continue to protect steep slopes from development pressure. B, natural diversity. Continue efforts to preserve areas listed on the natural diversity database maintained by the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection and special sensitive habitats. One goal being modify the zoning regulations to require that NDDB information be submitted on zoning applications. So that's definitely something that we could check off. We could add that into the permitting process, into our online permitting system to include that information on permits. And I think that's also something we could include in the GIS layers going forward, updating that. I don't know if we have that as a layer yet. Updating standards for the protection of vernal pool ecosystems and land use regulations is another goal. And then seeking to maintain wildlife corridors, minimize wildlife habitat fragmentation through the design of development and provision of open space, discouraging the planting or sale of non-native invasive plant species, and encourage the planting of native vegetation that supports local wildlife species. For C, implementation, using natural resource maps in the decision-making process of Willington's inland wetlands and water courses and planning and zoning commissions. Encouraging the use of pre-application process for proposed development within sensitive environmental areas. Encouraging open space cluster and similar approaches to preserve natural resources and direct development away from sensitive areas. And I think that was it for section 4. And so going forward, we'll go through each of these sections. And if you guys have any questions or if any goals stuck out to you that you guys think are important and kind of want to put on the to-do list.
Is there a copy of this published in our folder somewhere? Or
It's on the website.
Yeah, this is right out of the POCD.
Okay.
But I can definitely get this PowerPoint to you guys if you wanted it broken up into these sections, but this is right out of the plan.
Okay.
I think just to throw in my 2 cents. So the modify the zoning regulation to require that NDDB, as Chris mentioned, we can do this. We do have a lot of the NDDB areas mapped on our GIS. And so what we can do, as Chris talked about, was basically include it as a location flag in our permitting system. So when a property submits an application and it's within this NDDB area, it'll let us know. Vernal pools, ecosystem, land use regulations. I mean, that's really something that the Wetlands Commission can do. Towns can certainly establish stuff on the PZC side, but it becomes much more complicated because even in these NDDB areas, vernal pools, water courses, wetlands, all that stuff is fluid. Not to use a pun, but it changes. And so a vernal pool and the extent of it and mapping it, over time can change. Discouraging.
I think some of this came out of when the trucks from the area where the trucks stop, Love's wound up.
Yeah.
That happened prior to the last POCD.
Yeah. And so as part of the wetland application for that, they had to indicate all of that stuff. They had to do all of the reporting to the state through their wetlands application. That was all required by the Wetlands Commission. Some towns have language in their regs about non-native and basically require that all landscaping be native species. A lot of the stuff that we've seen has been, because if you plant something that's non-native, in some cases or many cases, it doesn't survive. So a lot of this stuff we can do in our approach without necessarily having to add 100 pages to the regs. So I think Chris, if you go back to the previous slide. So we talked about mapping the FEMA flood zones.
Yeah.
We don't have digital mapping data available for Willington from FEMA, but we can link the firm panels to our GIS, and our vendor has agreed to do that at no additional cost when we go to the upgraded site. So that will have much better information available to residents and property owners and developers. The low impact development stuff, we're sort of already moving in that direction. And the NDDB information and the aquifer protection area information, we can include that in our permitting system. So we are making progress in some of these things just through process, not necessarily because we've been following along with this. So not necessarily in bad shape.
That's all I had. I don't know if anybody had any more questions or.
No, that's good. It's good to go over this.
Yeah, excellent.
All right, item B, 2022 and 2023 budget.
So I don't know, the budgets are basically due this week. And I just didn't know if anybody had any questions or wanted to talk about it or kind of had any thoughts or.
Yeah, usually send me a copy just to take a look at, and it just, what basically where you at with it? Is it flat? Is it going up? Where is it going up if it is?
So, yep, and I have all that and I'm happy to send it to you. There is, the only increase that I have is related to, I forget which specific line it comes out of because they're kind of quirky in their titles, but it's I think an $1,800 increase related to the town's document management system. All of the town's files, we've gone over this, I think, a number of times. When you go onto the GIS, you can click on the documents button and you can view files that we have for the addresses. That's all through the GIS. Because of COVID, we really wanted to implement that. Simultaneously, our server that was being hosted on for a million years basically failed. And so we had to do a lot of work with our IT folks to save all that. So we are now on a cloud, because in talking to IT, it was going to be far more expensive to purchase and maintain and host a server on town property than it would be to go to the cloud. So this cost is related to just maintaining all of our land use data in a secure cloud-based format, so we don't have to purchase and maintain a server.
Okay, so we're looking at what, how much higher than the prior year?
So it would be, it's an additional $1,800.
1,800, that's it?
Everything else I've held flat.
That's pretty impressive, really.
Yeah.
Considering.
Yeah,
Okay,
I try to go in flat across the board, and we've done, with the permitting system and some of this other stuff, we've really been able to minimize our costs related to some of this stuff. We're not printing as much, we're not using as much office supplies, so we have savings there because we can put that towards other things.
is there any, though, did you take into consideration, like when we start, in-person meetings again, there might be more printings and so forth that need to be paid for?
Yeah, so we've transitioned the application forms through OpenGov to basically say that you submit your application online, and then we will request the documents in hard copy based on what we need. So we don't take them into the office because it's expensive for them to print them. If we go back to in-person meetings, we'll simply make that request so that we don't have to print any of that.
Is there any opportunity, even when we start the live meetings, to project some of this stuff so, it doesn't have to be printed off?
Yep.
Good.
Yeah. The other thing that, the GIS document links, when we worked with our GIS vendor on that, they didn't charge us because it's a solution that they think they can implement in a lot of towns. So they didn't charge us for the development of it because they can shop it around to other communities. So that didn't cost us anything. So we've been able to do a lot, but not have to increase anything.
Good
Very
job,
good.
Mike.
All right, any questions, anything else from the commission tonight? Okay, it is 8:28 PM, meeting adjourned.
Okay.
Have a good night.